It wasn't military defeat. It wasn't a lack of innovation. It wasn't even internal political bickering. It was the arithmetic of compound interest colliding with imperial overreach. The history of empires is not written in battles. It is written in ledgers. When a hegemon accumulates debt it cannot repay, to fund a dominance it can no longer afford, the outcome is mathematical. The pattern is unmistakable. It has destroyed superpowers for 2,000 years. And today the data suggests the United States has entered the terminal phase of this cycle. This is not a political statement. It is a structural reality. We are witnessing a historical mechanism that transfers power from the debtor to the creditor, from the declining empire to the rising challenger. To understand why a $35 trillion deficit is China's greatest geopolitical asset, we must look at three specific historical precedents. Three moments where the math overwhelmed the might. The first case study is the Spanish Empire in the 16th century. Under King Philip II, Spain was the master of the world. Its galleons ruled the oceans. Its armies were feared across Europe. But the cost of maintaining this global footprint was astronomical. To fund endless wars in Flanders and maintain imperial prestige, the Spanish crown relied on a monetary shortcut. They imported massive quantities of silver from the Americas, specifically from the Potosi mines. They treated this influx of metal as revenue, but in economic terms it was simply printing money. The result was the price revolution. Inflation tore through the Spanish economy. A shoemaker in Costile saw the price of leather and bread double, then triple, while the crown defaulted on its debts. In 1557, then again in 1575, then again in 1596, the middle class was hollowed out, productive capacity withered, and the manufacturing advantage shifted north to the Dutch and the English, who financed their rise on Spain's fiscal incompetence. Just like the Spanish Habsburgs, the British Empire walked this exact path 3 centuries later. By 1914, London was the financial capital of the world. The sterling was the global reserve currency. But to world wars shatter the balance sheet, Britain emerged from victory in 1945 with a debt-to-GDP ratio over 100%. They tried to maintain the illusion of global dominance. They tried to keep the sterling pegged to gold. But the arithmetic is merciless. The turning point came during the Suez Crisis of 1956. Britain launched a military operation to reclaim the Suez Canal. The United States, holding the leverage of Britain's massive debts, threatened to sell off sterling bonds. This would have collapsed the British economy. London was forced to withdraw, not because they lost on the battlefield, but because they were insolvent. The bondholder dictated terms to the debtor. A retired clerk in Manchester watched his pension's purchasing power dissolve as the empire retreated into a controlled decline. Just like the British Empire, ancient Rome faced the same calculus in the 3rd century. This is the most ominous parallel. Following the reign of emperors like Marcus Aurelius, the costs of manning, the borders became unsustainable. The legions required payment. The bureaucracy required funding. But the empire had stopped expanding, so the state chose the only option left: debasement. Emperors like Septimius Severus and later Diocletian began mixing base metals into the silver denarius. They reduced the silver content from nearly 100% to less than 5%. They created money from nothing to pay the bills. The result was hyperinflation that destroyed the Roman social fabric. Soldiers demanded higher wages to keep up with prices. Merchants hoarded goods. The economy localized. Trade routes broke down. And the barbarians at the gate did not need to be stronger than the legions. They just needed to wait for the Roman economy to suffocate itself. Sure, here's the text with breaks after full stops, commas, and question marks. Stage 1 is the era of sound money and high productivity, where the empire produces more than it consumes. Stage 2 is the peak where confidence is absolute and the empire begins to overextend. Militarily and socially, Stage 3 is the turning point where the cost of maintenance exceeds the revenue and the government begins to borrow heavily to maintain the illusion of prosperity. Stage 4 is the onset of monetary debasement where the state prints currency. or suppresses interest rates to service the debt, causing asset prices to disconnect from reality. Stage 5 is the era, a fracture where inflation destroys the middle class and the population splits into warring political tribes. Stage 6 is the flight to safety, where capital abandons the sovereign bond market and moves into hard assets or foreign rivals. Stage 7 is the reset, where the currency collapses or is revalued, and geopolitical power formally shifts to the creditor nation, just like Rome, the United States, is currently navigating the treacherous waters between Stage 5 and Stage 6. The national debt stands at $35 trillion. The interest payments on that debt have now surpassed the defense budget. This is the constraint that changes everything. In a geopolitical confrontation, the ability to project power relies on the ability to fund it. If the United States attempts to fight a major conflict, it must print trillions of dollars instantly. This would risk a hyperinflationary event that could shatter the dollar's reserve status. This is the advantage held by the rising challenger. China understands that they do not need to defeat the United States Navy in a direct confrontation. To win, they simply need to wait for the debt trap to close. The incentive for China is to accelerate this process by reducing their exposure to US Treasuries and accumulating physical gold, which current data suggests they are doing at a record pace. They are building a parallel financial system that does not rely on the dollar. Under these constraints, the rational move for a rival power is to allow the adversary to spend themselves into oblivion. The risk for Washington is that the bond market creates a Suez moment, a crisis where foreign creditors or simple market mechanics force a humiliating geopolitical retreat. Because the money simply isn't there, there is a common counter-argument to this grim trajectory. Many economists argue that because the US dollar is the world reserve currency, the United States can print money indefinitely without consequence. They claim there is no alternative or TINA. They argue that because China also faces demographic and economic challenges, the US will win by default. But this view ignores the mechanics of the bond market. The privilege of a reserve currency is not infinite. It is maintained only as long as global creditors trust the purchasing power of the debt. When the issuance of new debt is used solely to pay interest on old debt, the Ponzi dynamics become visible to everyone. History shows that when a hegemon abuses its currency privilege, the world does not stick with the abusive currency forever. They build alternatives. We are already seeing the fragmentation of the global payment system and the rise of bilateral trade agreements that bypass the dollar entirely. The endgame historically arrives in one of three ways. The first is a controlled decline. This is the British path after 1945. The empire accepts its reduced status, cuts spending, devalues the currency gradually, and aligns itself as a junior partner to the new power. It preserves social stability but sacrifices global dominance. The second is a chaotic collapse. This is the Roman path, or the Soviet path in 1991. The state refuses to cut spending, prints money until the currency is worthless and the political structure disintegrates entirely. This leads to a period of profound disorder, supply chain failure, and a complete restructuring of society. The third is a reset and restructure. This often happens through a sudden currency reform, such as Germany's introduction of the Rentenmark in 1923 or the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. The old debts are effectively wiped out or redenominated, and a new system is launched, usually backed by hard assets like gold to restore confidence. The only variable is timing and pain. If you want to understand how this transition will impact the cost of living, the value of your assets, and the future of the global order, you need to pay attention to the data, not the headlines. Subscribe to this channel. We will continue to track the flow of capital and the historical signals that the mainstream ignores. Education is your only hedge.